Good afternoon, everyone. Hopefully everyone can hear me. Welcome to today's webinar, MSI, What's Your Risk? We're going to talk about and discuss the various risk factors for MSIs and provide some real workplace examples of them and kind of guide you through what to do about them so you don't become the next person with an MSI. My name is Kathleen Sullivan, and I'm a Health and Safety Advisor in the Prevention Services Department of Workplace NL, and I'll be delivering the webinar today. So this webinar is part of Move Well, Work Well Week. Every year in Newfoundland and Labrador, there's a week to represent musculoskeletal injury prevention. It's a week long. It's the last week, full week of September, and we've rebranded it as Move Well, Work Well Week. Move Well, Work Well reminds us that when we move, instead of being sedentary or staying in one position for prolonged periods, and move well with good body mechanics, reduced force on our soft tissues, and safe lifting techniques, it results in us being well and working well, and being comfortable, productive, healthy, and reducing our risk of MSIs. When we move well, it means we are working well. So by taking part in Move Well, Work Well Week, you are raising awareness about MSI prevention in your own workplace. So some activities that you might do would be things like taking a wellness walk, provide employees with educational resources relevant to the work that they do, conduct informal inspections of workstations with an ergonomic lens, provide stretches or exercises that people can do at their desks or at their workplace, and participate in any sort of physical fitness challenge with your coworkers, as well as attend some of these webinars that we have on the go this week. Workplace NL also has a special webpage with resources for employers to use and information to assist in organizing the campaign on our website. So you can feel free to check that out as well. A couple of housekeeping items before we begin. So in the handout section, there's a PDF copy of the presentation that I'm going to be presenting. So you can download that only during the webinar. So make sure you get that downloaded during the webinar. You can print it off or save it to your computer so you have a copy of it. Asking questions is encouraged. If you'd like to ask a question, you can type it into the chat window and I'll respond at the end of the presentation. If we run out of time, I'll respond to your to your questions in an email. At the end of the webinar, you'll receive an evaluation. I encourage you to complete the evaluation as it helps us deliver better and more meaningful webinars. You can also include any topics of interest that you'd like to see us present a webinar on. We'll also take a micro break at the 30-minute mark. I'll ask you to stand and stretch and give your body the opportunity to change postures and get the blood moving throughout your body. So today's topics, we're going to cover some base level information about MSIs so you understand what MSIs are and why you may be at risk, the signs and symptoms and what to do if they occur, why MSIs in the workplace matter. We're going to look at the impact to our province as well as legislative requirements for MSI prevention. We're going to cover each risk factor independently so you get a good handle on what they are and be able to recognize them in your own workplace. We're going to talk about how to manage the risk and who is responsible for what to ensure a successful process for prevention of MSIs. And we're also going to learn about some ergonomics and its role in the prevention of MSIs as well as controlling MSIs. We'll go through the ergonomics principles and some practical controls to help prevent them. All right, so our first poll question, so it's going to be launched there by Tina. She's got it up on the screen there. So basically, we just want to know what your current knowledge level is on this topic. And the topic is MSI, what's your risk, or essentially risk factors related to MSI. So the options there are very good, good, average, poor, or no knowledge. So feel free to select the one that you feel comfortable with. And the results will not be shared, so please be honest. And we're going to ask you, again, at the end of the presentation. So hopefully you've learned something throughout the presentation. So Tina's going to keep that open for a few more seconds there. So get your answers in as quick as you can. And then Tina will close the poll. All right, so moving on there. Just starting off with some basics. Musculoskeletal injuries are disorders of the muscles, tendons, ligaments, joints, nerves, blood vessels, or other related soft tissues. And they include things like sprains, strains, and inflammation that may be caused or aggravated by work. MSI is an umbrella term for many different injuries and conditions to those soft tissues. So some other names that you might have heard instead of a musculoskeletal injury or an MSI could be repetitive strain injury, musculoskeletal disorder, overuse injury, or soft tissue injury. Some common MSIs, so common injuries that you might have heard of could be things like tendonitis, muscle sprains and ligament strains, disc disorders such as like a slip disc or a herniated disc, as well as bursitis and carpal tunnel syndrome. An MSI can occur anywhere in the body, but they often occur in the back, shoulder, neck, elbow, wrist, or knee. They can result from an acute single traumatic event, such as lifting a load that's too heavy for you and injuring your back, or they can develop, or more often, they develop over time as a result of cumulative damage to your body tissues, such as prolonged improper movement, which can result in a shoulder injury, a back injury, a neck injury, sort of thing. So basically, poor body mechanics. And we're going to talk about all these things as we go on through the presentation. So some signs and symptoms. So a sign is something that can be observed by somebody else. So something like redness, swelling, or maybe difficulty moving a body part, or potentially even loss of strength of your body parts. A symptom is something that is felt by the person but cannot be observed by a third party. Something like numbness or tingling, pain, discomfort, tenderness, or a shooting and burning sensation. So like an alarm system, these signs and symptoms are our body's way of telling us that something's wrong. Signs and symptoms may present immediately as a result of an acute injury, but more often they appear gradually over time and progressively worsen. Early detection and reporting of these MSIs are critical. It's important to listen to what your body is telling you. You know your back is sore and you know your knee is hurting, but if you don't do anything about it, chances are your signs and symptoms will probably get worse. As I always tell employers, if we don't know, we can't fix it. So the earlier you report the issue to your supervisor or manager, the better health outcomes you're going to receive, and the less time you're going to be in pain or potentially away from work. Without treatment, some MSIs may result in permanent injury and complete loss of function in the affected area. So again, if you're not sure if it's work that's causing your ache or pain, you should still talk to your supervisor or manager about it, because there's several resources available to help assist those managers or supervisors in figuring out the problem and to assist you in creating, coming up with creative solutions to support you and help potentially reverse your signs and symptoms. Okay, so the impact of MSI. So again, why should you really care? So first off, as evident on the slide there, MSIs are costly, but more importantly, they can be very painful and sometimes debilitating. They can alter the quality of a person's life. So at Workplace NL, so these stats are as of 2021, the end of 2021, over the last 5 years, 69% of all claims involving lost time from work at Workplace NL are MSIs. 71% of all costs related to those claims are related to MSIs. 75% of all lost time weeks from work are related to MSIs. And in general, overall in the province, it costs annually $103 million in claims for MSIs. So again, those numbers are pretty huge and they are growing each year. While reported, as you can see from the graphic, never mind, I just read that part. Musculoskeletal injuries are costly for employers, and the time for the workers to rehabilitate from these types of injuries are often quite lengthy. So we really want to stop them from happening in the first place and have an effective MSI prevention program. And for some people, if they do get injured, it may not even be possible for them to return to full work capacity. The longer a person is away from work, the more severe the injury, the more costly it is, and for injured workers as well as for employers. Another reason that we need to be working to prevent MSIs is because it's the law. So as of 2009, 7 sections were added into the Newfoundland and Labrador Occupational Health and Safety Regulations related specifically to musculoskeletal injury prevention. So it's sections 50 to 56, and it puts the onus on employers to recognize factors in the workplace that may expose workers to a risk of MSI and evaluate this risk. Put in place controls to reduce workers' exposures to MSI hazards. Advise workers of the risk factors in their jobs and workplaces to train them in the specific measures and procedures used to control the hazard. Follow up to ensure preventative measures are working, and consult with workers when performing risk assessments. And the ones that they have to consult with are any workers with signs or symptoms of MSIs, a representative sample of the workers who are required to carry out the work being assessed, as well as with the OHS committee or worker health and safety rep and designate. There's also two other sections. Section 55 is related to seating or standing work. So it basically addresses the need to control the risk to workers who either sit a lot or stand a lot while working. And Section 56 is related to lifting and handling. And it basically says that employers are responsible for providing equipment to handle heavy or awkward loads. And if that's not applicable, then they must adapt those heavier awkward loads to facilitate that manual handling. So while the employer has many obligations due to legislation, so do workers. So workers would be responsible to report those MSI hazards, participate in any risk assessments, as well as follow the safe work practices and procedures laid out by the employer. So this slide kind of shows who is at risk for MSI. So generally people associate MSIs with maybe people working in an office environment. They think, oh, MSI is carpal tunnel syndrome. You only get that from working in an office. Or on the contrary, they might associate it with people who do a lot of manual handling or lifting in their job. So they might associate it with, warehouse workers or something like that. However, the top 10 occupations that are affected by MSIs over the last few years is on the screen there. So as you can see, there's high risk for MSIs and workers in the healthcare and social services industry, such as the personal care attendants, the licensed practical nurses, and the registered nurses. In the wholesale and retail trade, from the retail salesperson and sales clerks, as well as potentially the material handlers or maybe even truck drivers. Food service, such as the food counter attendant. Construction, so that would be the construction trades there, helpers and laborers, as well as potentially in the manufacturing and cleaning industries. So there's light duty cleaners up at the top there and janitors and caretakers at the bottom. So again, and when you think about the amount of, it says at the top there that it's 5.6%, or sorry, 6.5%, but which might not sound like a lot, but when you think of the amount of personal care attendants that are in the province, it's quite a few people. However, even though those are the ones with the highest risk for MSIs, MSI risk factors exist in all professions and all occupations. So we want to make sure that everybody in the province knows about the risk factors in their occupation and in their industry, so they can make sure that they're on the lookout for those. So we're going to jump right into the MSI risk factors. So if you're constantly using a workstation that's not designed to fit you, you're going to be exposed to a risk factor called awkward postures. And you may be well on your way to developing a painful MSI. The same goes if your job consistently requires you to use the same motions, repeat the same motions with your body, or hold your body in a fixed position for periods of time. So the 4 primary risk factors are there on the screen in bold. So they are forceful exertions, awkward postures, repetitive motion, and sustained postures. So these risk factors may exist by themselves. However, usually 2 or more occur together, such as repetitive motions and awkward postures. And then obviously when 2 exist together, the potential for the MSI actually increases. So it's a more risky activity, you could say. MSIs are also associated with the bottom 4 factors on the screen: vibration, contact stress, extreme temperatures, and inadequate lighting. However, they are less prevalent. So we are going to focus on the main 4, but we'll touch on the other 4 as well. So forceful exertions, our first one there, refers to the forces that act on the body to complete a job or task, or the amount of effort that muscles must exert to complete a job or task. So it could be the job may involve high amounts of force, such as lifting something that's too heavy, again, or it may involve accumulating those forces on your body over a period of time, so lifting or handling lighter loads more frequently. In this case, basically the tolerance of your body tissues gradually declines, possibly leading to the development of an MSI. So it's the straw that broke the camel's back sort of deal. Examples of forceful exertions would include anything that involves manual material handling, which would be lifting, lowering, carrying, pushing, pulling, gripping, and manipulating. So generally the back is the most common body part that's injured from forceful exertions, with the lumbar region or the low back being the most vulnerable. And overexertion and lifting is a common cause of injuries in our workplaces. So again, manual handling, even though you might not think it, actually occurs in every work environment. So some things that you do every day, whether it's in your personal life or in your work life, could be things like pushing carts, loading and unloading trucks, mopping and vacuuming floors, lifting a client or a pet or a child, operating a piece of equipment overhead, or handling heavy loads, boxes, garbage, whatever you have there. Repetitive motion refers to the need to use the same body parts over and over without enough rest for those muscles to recover. There's considerably more cumulative effort required when performing the task over and over the course of a day. When tasks are performed often with a high frequency or over a long period of time, they can cause gradual chronic trauma to those body tissues. This has to do, again, with the accumulation of the load on the tissues, and repetition has a large effect on blood flow, which may impact the supply of oxygen, fuel, and nutrients to the muscles. In relation to manual handling, so that could be, like I said, the lifting, lowering, carrying, pushing, pulling sort of things. The more repetitive the task is, the lower the load has to be in order for the body tissue to be able to withstand the workload. So again, some examples of repetitive motion tasks could be, again, and these could be in your personal life or in your work life, folding laundry, painting, loading or unloading product, handling product on an assembly line, prolonged use of a computer mouse or keyboard, opening mail, sweeping and mopping, or using a knife to repeatedly perform the same cut, such as chopping or preparing food. So awkward postures is our next one, and they occur when the body moves away from its natural neutral position. So that's kind of seen by the skeleton guy on the left there on the screen. So you're in your neutral position when you're standing straight up with your head looking forward, your upper limbs are at your side with your palms facing your legs, and your lower limbs are hip distance apart with your toes pointing forward. So the farther the body segment, like your arm or your leg or whatever, moves away from that neutral position, the greater the risk of the MSI, the riskier the posture is. So awkward postures basically place hidden loads on the body. For example, if you bend forward at the waist to lift a load, you're not only lifting the weight of the load, but you also have to lift the weight of your upper body. So this can add stress on the back tissues, increasing your injury risk. Awkward postures also reduce that blood flow that's so important for those muscles. They can place stress on tendons, and they can cause ligaments to become permanently stretched out, as well as irritate the nerves. So again, all causes for an MSI. So again, some things that you might see or hear of in your work life or your daily life could be things like reaching in front of your body or to one side to constantly pick something up, reaching overhead like the guy in the photo on the right there, twisting your back, bending your back forward or to one side, bending or twisting of the wrists, turning or bending the neck, as well as kneeling, squatting, or stooping for long periods of time. Sustained postures refer to those postures that have to be maintained for a long period of time. So even neutral postures, such as neutral sitting or standing, like the guy on the right-hand side there, if they're sustained for too long, can still be hazardous. During sustained efforts, your muscles basically are continuously contracting without movement and without rest. So that sustained contraction leads to an accumulation of stress on those tissues, as well as compromised blood flow, which again decreases the tolerance of the tissues and can lead to an MSI. So even if you're doing it standing or sitting in neutral posture, you can still get an MSI. All right, so again, going back to our risk factors here. So we just went through forceful exertions, awkward postures, repetitive motions, and sustained postures. However, the bottom four here on the screen, vibration, contact stress, extreme temperatures, and inadequate lighting also present risks for MSI. So vibration is becoming more and more of a concern in the workplace as more research is being done. It's most often associated with the use of powered hand tools, or large pieces of equipment, such as loaders or tractors or forklifts. These types of items shake your whole body and basically can put your organs actually at risk, as well as your body tissues, because when they're shaken constantly, they actually start to stretch out. And when ligaments or get stretched out, then they can actually cause damage to permanent damage to those structures. In terms of the hand-arm vibration, such as if you're using a jackhammer, a lawnmower, a chainsaw, something like that, something that vibrates and you're holding it in your hand or your hands, I guess, your body tries to resist the vibration, so it actually produces higher grip forces to hold the item or steady itself. So you're increasing the force, and it also constricts your blood vessels and reduces that blood flow to those body tissues again. So that's one that we got to watch out for as well. Contact stress. So this actually occurs when a body part comes in contact with a solid surface, object, or material. It's a pressure point, which again leads to decreased blood flow to those tissues. This is because contact stress pinches the blood vessels at the skin and decreases the tolerance, leading to an increased risk of injury. It can also irritate your nerves, tendons, and ligaments. So for example, if you're typing on a keyboard with your wrists or your forearms resting on the edge of the desk, that's contact stress on those nerves and tendons in the carpal tunnel and can lead to carpal tunnel syndrome. So some other examples might be holding a tool that has ridges or a hard edge on the handle, kneeling on the floor. So again, it's contact stress on your knee, striking something with your hand, like a hammer, like using your hand like a hammer, leaning your stomach against a machine or the table edge or something when you're leaning over or trying to do something, as well as when you're sitting in a chair and the back of your legs are compressed against the front of the seat. So extreme temperatures, cold and heat can result in decreased blood flow to working tissues. When we are cold, our blood flow gets redirected from our extremities to our vital organs. So again, there's decreased blood flow. As well, it reduces our tactile sensation, so our touch sensation in our fingers, hands, and other extremities. So when you attempt to grab something or manipulate an object, you can't feel it as well, so you have to grip it harder. And then this leads to increased workload on tissues. Heat kind of is the same situation. It provides a similar scenario. So when it's hot, you tend to sweat more, which makes objects more slippery to handle. So to overcome this, you grip that object harder, again, exerting more force. And now we're back into that forceful exertion risk factor as well. So again, over time, this leads to muscle fatigue, decreased tissue tolerance, and lack of tissue repair, and an increased risk of MSIs. Finally, we have inadequate lighting. So workers need proper lighting to do their job safely and efficiently. Workers who do not have enough lighting are more likely to use awkward postures to see their work. So for example, if you're a painter and you're trying to see, look in the room to see where you missed a spot or something like that, you might be looking at the wall weird or leaning over or exerting an awkward posture in order to see the work at hand. Or even if you're working at a computer, for example, sunlight or even artificial light from overhead lights can cause glare on your screen. So you might need to use an awkward posture, such as straining your neck forward or squinting your eyes to see your work. Fluorescent lights as well, which are in most workplaces, I would say, or most indoor workplaces. They also have a flicker, which can cause eye strain as well as headaches, which could be classified as an MSI. And we also have lots of resources on our website about these risk factors. So if you want to look some more, and we actually have one handy document that has all these risk factors in one go for you. So you can see that online as well. All right, so now we're going to get into some other contributing factors. So those were the main risk factors. Some other contributing factors that affect the level of worker the level of risk to a worker are things like the work organization, so how the work is organized. Having to work long hours can increase the likelihood that workers will experience an MSI as a result of combination of body fatigue and longer exposure to the hazard. Physical stresses that are associated with manual handling tasks or whatever can weaken musculoskeletal tissues throughout the day. As a result, something you did with no problem at the start of your shift could injure you later in the shift, depending on the amount of breaks that you have, how tired you are, how fast you're working, if you've had an opportunity to vary your task, or if you've had an opportunity to change jobs with somebody. So shift and task scheduling, like I said, task pacing, work rate, task variability, and work recovery cycles are all things that we need to consider when we're talking about how the work is organized, and if they're not done properly or they're not done effectively, they can actually put workers at risk of MSI. Another thing that is becoming more and more prevalent are those psychosocial factors that can contribute to MSI. So psychosocial factors are work-related stressors that can potentially affect workers. So they can be anything from increased job demands, low control of your job, to lack of fairness and support, to lack of work quality. Some other things could be like poorly managed change and poor relationships in the workplace. So because of those things, they lead to increased stress. Stress creates a negative body response that, if it's present for long periods of time, can lead to musculoskeletal disorders and physiological changes in the tissue. So like fundamental changes in your tissues. So high work demands and mental load, again, from that stress that we talked about, can have a direct impact on the forces that we apply. They can increase muscle activity and tension, reduce muscle relaxation and increase muscle fatigue, increase sensitivity to pain, decrease frequency of breaks and micropauses because we're stressed, so we got to get that work done. Create, again, those physiological changes, those changes at the fundamental levels of our body in those soft tissues, as well as changes of perception in our work situations. So we have high work demands. There's a direct impact on those forces that they will imply because they're stressed. So again, several work factors have been directly influenced throughout the use of ergonomics, which we're going to get to in a few slides. So again, that good ergonomics takes into consideration psychosocial health as well. So again, that's what we're going to use as a control to, I shouldn't say limit, to reduce the psychosocial factors that may impact us for an MSI. And then finally, we have our own individual characteristics and behavior that affect our MSI risk in either a positive or a negative way. So some things like smoking, obesity. So obesity increases the amount of load and strain on your joints. It reduces your joint mobility and decreases your cardiovascular health. And a worker with excess weight may not have the same ability to carry loads as another person. A sedentary lifestyle, again, just means that you may not have the best physical fitness, so your muscular endurance, leg strength, joint mobility might be lacking. Physical limitations, so if workers have a specific disability or illness that produces physical restrictions, that may increase the risk of MSIs. A history of back disorders, for example, may increase the risk of future back injuries. Diabetes, pregnancy, other conditions may affect hormonal and physical changes to the body. Pregnant workers are actually, again, same as people who may be overweight. They're actually limited in their ability to carry load close to their body in the proper way, as well as our attitude. Again, this is something that a lot of people don't consider, but our own personal attitude and commitment to safety influences whether we apply our training, whether we follow those safe work practices, and which may alter our level of risk. So will I wear those knee pads? Oh, well, they make my life more miserable, so I'm not going to wear them to protect my knees, for example. So some of these risk factors, there's also another risk factor, which is age, that you can't change, unfortunately. Young workers are still developing physically, so their joints and spine might be more easily damaged. As well, older workers may not necessarily have the same range of motion, fitness level, or strength that they had in the past. because a lot of muscle strength, flexibility, reaction time actually decline with age. So while some of these risk factors cannot be changed, we still must be aware that these limitations exist within each person, and it may put them at a higher risk of MSIs. So as an employer, we have to realize that some people might have personal risk factors that put them at a higher risk. And as workers, we need to realize that we might be bringing risks to the workplace in terms of MSIs. All right, so that's at 2:31 right now. So we're gonna take a quick 1-minute micro break. So encourage you to stand up, walk around, do a couple stretches, and I'll be back in 1 minute. Okay, I am back. Hopefully so are you. If you're not, we're gonna keep going anyways. So hopefully we get you all caught up here. So that was the end of our risk factor segment, I guess, of the webinar. So now we're gonna get into evaluating that risk. So most people have heard of hazard recognition, evaluation, and control, as it's usually the foundation for most OHS programs. So in order to eliminate workplace hazards, including MSI ones, and minimize the risk, we must have a process for recognizing, evaluating them, and selecting the best method to control them. So overall, the process is generally seen as 4 steps. Step 1 is recognizing the hazard, where you identify the hazards in the workplace that expose workers to the risk of MSI. Step 2 is evaluating that risk. Step 3 is controlling, so identifying and implementing controls to eliminate hazards or minimize the risks. And step 4 is monitoring and evaluating the controls for effectiveness and implementing new controls where necessary. So again, the first step in reducing those MSI hazards is recognizing that they exist and that they exist in every single workplace. So we already talked about those, so I'm not going to go through them. Those are the workplace risk factors such as awkward postures, sustained postures, forceful exertions, repetitive motions. The other 4, vibration, contact stress, temperatures, and illumination, as well as those contributing factors such as work organization, personal risk factors, and psychosocial factors. So we can recognize these hazards by hazard reports, through checklists or inspections, any past experience, so things that workers bring up, information about previous injuries, illnesses, near misses, or incident reports, as well as observation of the process or the task. So once hazard's been recognized, we generally do some sort of risk evaluation or hazard assessment or analysis to calculate the level of risk for workers. So most people have probably seen something like the matrix on the slide. So generally what we would do is a team of people would perform a risk assessment using a rating scale or a matrix as a tool within their risk assessment process. So whatever is there at your business is fine. So basically, each person is going to have a different idea of how risky a task is, or they may have a different level of risk tolerance depending on their experience. So that's why we do it in teams, because everyone is different. So essentially, we would want them to discuss and define from their workplace the severity and the probability of the task and assign it to a level of risk during the risk assessment. So like I said, the severity is ranked on a scale of 1 to 5 in this model. Might be 1 to 3, might be 1 to 4, whatever model you use. So between no impact to extensive severity level. And then the probability, so how likely it is to happen, if it's highly unlikely or very likely, and the results are multiplied together in order to get your final number. So once that's calculated, you might have areas like on the slide here, the red, yellow, and green. So the green would be a low risk activity or situation, which means that there's probably no controls necessary for those tasks. The yellow is kind of the medium or moderate risk level. So any event that falls into this area or any task might be judged to say this needs more monitoring, but we might have as many controls as reasonably practical. Even if we keep the risk at that level, we accept it, but we need to still make sure we are monitoring the controls that are in place. And then finally, the red area. So this would be a high probability or high severity or high risk rate. So this would basically say, stop, we need to control this work task or event to make sure that we put something in place so no one gets injured. So it means do not do this without implementing controls to bring it down to at least the moderate level of risk. Now, MSI risk also brings a little bit more evaluation to the table. So MSI, we also need to consider the magnitude of the hazard, or the intensity might be called. So how awkward that posture is, how fast those repetitive motions are, how much force do we need for that forceful exertion, how hard is that contact surface. So again, the more awkward or the faster or the more force, for example, the greater the risk. The duration that the worker is exposed to the risk thing. So again, if your shift is 12 hours long as opposed to 8 hours long, that's putting you at an exposure duration that's higher, as well as your frequency exposure. So again, increased frequency. So again, if you're repeating something over and over and over again, if you have to do it 100 times versus 20 times, then you're exposed to that hazard more often. So again, and most of the time in MSIs, we see this with a combination of hazards. So again, working in those awkward postures with a high repetition rate, or working in cold temperatures while working with power tools. So all those things basically increase the risk of that activity. So again, the way the work is organized, workplace design and considerations, characteristics of the load that is handled, all may influence the magnitude of the hazard or the duration and frequency of the hazard as well. So on the slide, I'm going to go through a couple risk assessment tools. I'm not going to go into too much detail. I'm just showing you a couple examples that you could use that are other ways to assess MSI risk specifically. So the one on the screen right now is a lift lower calculator. This is from Workplace BC. So you just kind of put in, okay, you're lifting at 20 pounds, you're going all the way to the floor with that 20 pounds. Do you twist your body more than 45 degrees? The answer would be yes. How many lift or lowers are, so you're doing one lift every 5 minutes for 2 hours a day, and then you just click calculate, and it brings you to the next one and says your weight limit is 17 pounds. So even though that in that scenario, your object that you're lifting is 20 pounds, but your weight limit for the time and the length of your lift and how far you're going actually is only 17, which means you need to put something in place to reduce that risk. So the actual weight is greater than the weight limit. So it's an increased risk of lifting or lowering, and so they would want you to put a control in place to make sure it gets controlled. To eliminate or reduce the risk. Another great resource, and Tina is going to put this in the chat there, is a website called msdprevention.com. There are a variety of tools that will help you assess MSI risk in your workplace. They actually have an assessment tool picker, which basically is you can pick whichever tool will assess your risk the best, depending on your occupation, depending on your industry that you're in, depending on which posture that you're talking about, or if it's awkward postures or forceful exertions or what have you. So for example, in this one, this is about a healthcare service. So they're handling a patient and they need to identify the hazards, and they click on the risk assessment page and it brings them to something like this. So this is a way to look at the risk in this workplace and to get more details on it. So again, this is an Ontario resource and the previous one was a BC resource. So there might be some occupational health and safety legislation that might be referenced. However, it would not necessarily be applicable to Newfoundland and Labrador. But again, there's hundreds of risk assessment tools that are available to help you assess MSI risks in your workplace. So make sure that you kind of do your homework and find the right one for you. All right, so once we have our risk evaluated or our hazards evaluated, then we can look at controlling them. So again, I'm sure probably everyone here in this webinar has seen this hierarchy of controls before. It's very common in health and safety. So we want to control the hazard by implementing a process or a mechanism that reduces the risk with that hazard. So ideally, we'd start at the top and we would eliminate the hazard from the workplace completely. So for example, if we can't get rid of a hazardous job or a tool or process or a machine, we might, so instead of manual material handling, so lifting something by hand, we just move it with a forklift. That completely eliminates the MSI risk for that task. We could look at substitution if elimination is not an option. So we could replace a traditional stapler with an ergonomic one. We could place a right-handed tool with a left-handed tool for left-handed people. Or we could change a vehicle seat or a working seat to be something more supportive. Engineering controls are physical changes made to the workstation, equipment, tools, or materials to kind of fit the job to the worker. And this is where we're really going to see some ergonomics type of things come in. So we could look at making changes to the design of the work. So having a height adjustable work table so it'll fit more people, anti-fatigue matting or floated floors, using tool balancers, which is like a spring-loaded support so that you don't have to carry the weight of the tool. It's supported by a system. Or again, using those mechanical aids to help you manual handling. So like a cart or a dolly. So you still have to manual handle, but you wouldn't have to carry that box or that load from all the way to the other side of the shop, for example. And we're going to talk about this a little bit more in the next couple slides. Then we have administrative controls, which would be things about dealing with the activities of the workers or reorganizing the work. So rotating workers through jobs, modifying the work schedules to reduce the frequency or duration of exposure to a hazard, modifying the pace of work or the work pattern in which it's organized, so alternating physical tasks with non-physical ones, alternating sides during an assembly line, so you can use both sides of your body, ensure there's adequate staffing, developing training, and implementing safe work procedures. And then finally, our last option, which is our last resort, is PPE or personal protective equipment. So that reduces the severity of the exposure to the hazard at the person. So this would be things like knee pads for when you're working on the floor, or footwear with shock absorbing soles if you're walking or standing on hard surfaces all day. Could be also things like vibration absorbing gloves, or even just gloves in general if you're working in cold environments. So again, often MSI controls are not generally elaborate or expensive. A simple change in a work process, a workstation, or a tool may be effective. So for example, if you're working at a computer and the monitor is too low, put a book underneath of it or a pack of paper or something like that. So again, it doesn't necessarily always have to be a complete change in the workplace. And then finally, once those controls are in place, we need to make sure we take that last step in the process, which is to follow up and make sure it's effective. So making sure that it's effective will make sure that the changes are being followed, that people know about the changing, that the training is there and consistent, and that they were effective in actually eliminating the hazard or minimizing the risk. And we should definitely be making sure that when we do this, that we're consulting with workers so that any concerns that they may have of these new controls that we put in place are addressed. All right, starting to wrap it up here now. So ergonomics is generally how we would say we would prevent or control MSIs. So ergonomics is a science dedicated to designing jobs, tasks, products, work environments, and work systems to make them compatible with the needs, abilities, and limitations of people. So on the slide there, you have the human or the worker in the middle of the cogwheel. So everything that they interact with, the processes, tasks, people, all should be designed to fit their needs. So things like making sure their work surface is at the proper working height so they can work in neutral posture. Making sure that the items that they handle in their workstation are within easy reach so they don't have to reach too far. Making sure that they're provided lifting devices to reduce manual material handling. Making sure that the flow of work is designed to avoid unnecessary steps. Making sure that the tools that they have fit their hands, or they're light enough that they can carry them, or they require minimal force to use. That they have a variety of work tasks that they can rotate between to break up prolonged sitting or prolonged standing perhaps. And that they're encouraged to take breaks and micro breaks so they can enhance blood flow, recover muscles, and reset their body mechanics. So again, these are just a few kind of things that we talk about when we talk about ergonomics. And when we talk about ergonomics, we're usually talking about the next three things here on the slide. So workplace design, work organization, and support in the workplace. So workplace design is one of those engineering type controls. So again, we want to design the work for the worker from start to finish. So this usually requires physical changes in the workplace. So again, it takes into account the various shapes, sizes, and heights and reaches of people. And we're going to talk about this in the next couple slides. Work organization is usually an administrative type control. for MSI hazards. So again, it's the manner in which your work is carried out. So you should be able to have job variability, so you can change up your job tasks, set a reasonable pace for work, and taking regular breaks. So those are usually administrative type controls. And then those supports in the workplace are important for keeping workers happy, healthy, and safe. So those are the resources such as having enough people to do the work, having enough equipment and repairing defective equipment, as well as supporting workers with proper PPE. So into the workplace design here, there's several things that we need to consider when we're talking about workplace design. When we design a workspace, we need to make sure that people have the proper amount of space to do their work, as well as the proper amount of space using proper body mechanics. So on the slide, there are some basic examples of body mechanics, things like keeping your elbows close to your body, maintaining your balance, being able to use those large muscles in your legs and hips as opposed to your back to do the heavy work, and maintaining neutral posture. So this is easy to picture for stationary work, like if you're sitting at a computer, for example. However, lots of people in our province do non-stationary work every day. So we need to keep these body mechanics principles in mind, even when we're not sitting or standing or doing stationary work. So for example, this guy right here who's cutting down a tree, so he's using a nice neutral posture. He's got his elbows as close to his body as he can get them. His back is nice and straight. He's got a good base of support, so he's got good balance and keeping that neutral spine. So neutral posture is what you can see here on the slide there next to him in the skeleton x-ray type guy. So that happens when the joints are in their resting position. Again, the back actually has 3 spinal curves in it. So one in your neck, one in your mid back, and then one in your low back. So it looks like a little S. And we want it to maintain that S shape because it's when it's in its most stable and strong position. And then the same thing is true with all of our remaining joints. So our arms and legs sort of thing. When they're in their neutral positions, they're supporting tissues. So those tendons, ligaments, muscles are not too stretched and they're not too short. So there's minimal physical strain and optimal blood flow. And again, as I said before, good blood flow plays an important role in the prevention of MSIs and reduces fatigue and discomfort. So we want to make sure that when we're working in neutral posture, we keep our neck aligned with our spine, our elbows close to our sides, and those wrists fairly straight. Another thing to consider when we're talking about designing a workspace is about work surface height. So again, the height of your work surface affects your ability to work in neutral posture. Most work should be done about elbow height. So if I'm sitting at a desk, my keyboard and my mouse should be at elbow level. I shouldn't be tilting my arms up or tilting them down to be able to perform my work. And again, this would be true whether I was sitting or whether I was standing. Some exceptions to this rule are heavy work. So if I'm kneading bread dough or I'm doing something that I might be like packaging products or pulling loads towards me, that sort of thing, then I would like my work to be lower than elbow height. And if I'm doing things that require light work or things that require visual acuity, so I need to be able to see them really well, then I would prefer for that work to be higher than elbow height. So things like working on jewelry or wiring or electronics sort of thing, inspecting parts. As long as those objects are light, I want that to be above my elbow height. So some other things to consider when we're talking about workplace design are reaching. So reaching, again, when we have to reach, it means our elbows are coming away from our body, which we want to try to avoid. So we want to try to keep everything that we need on a regular basis in that primary or frequent reach zone. That's that first little circle there. So that person working on the computer, their mouse and their keyboard are within that primary zone. So again, if you're working at a cash register, obviously your cash register would be there, your credit card machine potentially, any emergency button perhaps if you need one or have one, or something like that. If you reach for things infrequently, or if you're sitting at that computer and you might need to answer your phone or take notes, then those things would be in the secondary zone or the infrequent reach zone. So again, that's within 1 arm's length. So again, that's also where your computer screen should be, is within 1 arm's length of where you're sitting. So again, at that cashier workstation, for example, it might be things like an adding machine, a calculator, an intercom, or a telephone, as long as they're only used infrequently. And then finally, we have the tertiary zone or the occasional zone. So this would be as if we occasionally perform a task. So this might be a really awkward reach, so we have to lean forward and reach or something like that. Reaching down into a desk drawer, for example, or up above a cabinet or something like that. So these would be at the tertiary zone. So we want to keep anything there that we wouldn't be reaching for on a regular basis at all. As well, we might consider, if we need to reach for those, either putting them in a more accessible place or putting them in, or changing our body posture to be able to access them. So standing up to reach that cabinet above your desk, as opposed to just reaching up with your arm while you're sitting. So yeah, so those are the reach zones for that. We also talk about load location. So again, workplace design should take into account where we're putting the load if we're manual material handling. Again, this is not only specific to manual material handling, but it's more so specific to when we're talking about forces and exerting force. So anytime that we're lifting, we want to carry something between shoulder height and what we call knuckle height, which is when your arms are resting by your sides, approximately where your knuckles are. That's where anything that's large, heavy, or frequent, that's where we're going to access those things. And that's where we should store those things if we have access, if we're storing them on a shelf or whatnot. So at the grocery store, for example, those large, heavy, and frequent items should be in that general trunk range. Anything that is small, light, or infrequently used should be placed on the bottom shelves, we'll say, or near the lower level. So we'll say from your knuckle height to your feet. Those would be things like that we don't use very often, but may need to use them. They should still also be light. And then finally, something that we use very, very infrequently, so very occasionally, would be stored at shoulder height or above. And again, we would still want to make sure that we change our posture because we want to avoid anything over height if at all possible. So we might want to change our posture by going to get a step stool or a ladder or something else in order to be able to access those items instead of standing and reaching awkwardly above our head and trying to lift something down off a shelf. That's just a recipe for an MSI. So we want to avoid that if at all possible. Next one, we're talking about work organization. So again, I've touched on this a bit. It's related to ergonomics as well. So it's the manner in which your work is carried out. So we want to have a good balance between work activity and rest. Change up our job tasks to alternate physical and less physical work. We're going to set a reasonable pace of work and hours of work. So doing these things can help reduce our risk by sustained postures and repetitive motion, by allowing workers to be more mindful of their postures and not to take shortcuts in their work. This is something that is generally, like I said, considered through administrative controls. So like I said, changing up your job tasks. You might have a thing that says every hour you're going to change your job tasks. Or some jobs have peak work demand. Like in seasonal work, like in the fishing industry, where you have tight deadlines for quotas to be caught and processed. So this may force workers to work faster or skip their breaks, increasing the rate of fatigue and the risk of injury. So again, we want to make sure we're implementing controls using work organization tactics. Again, that administrative control to consider the way the work is organized. We can practice good ergonomics. This is just a slide to, most people say, oh, well, I can't change when I take my breaks or that sort of things, but we can do some things ourselves, such as plan our own day. So like making sure that you have all the equipment, tools, and PPE that you need, making sure that they're all in good working order, asking, oh, am I gonna need any help? Should I tell my boss or whatever that I'm gonna need help for this task later? Is there an opportunity for me to change my work pattern? Have I identified the safest way to do my work? That should technically be identified by the employer in a safe work practice, but hopefully we can do that. And have I warmed up my body? Have I done my warm up, my stretch and flex, my body preparation techniques, whatever you have to make sure that you're ready for the day ahead. Finally, we have supports in the workplace. So those lack of supports in the workplace may increase a worker's risk. So for some examples would be not having enough staff, having a defective or not enough equipment, inadequate training or supervision, as well as the lack of support from coworkers and supervisors. So again, having these supports in place, it reduces those psychosocial risk factors that we talked about, as well as just helps keep workers happy and healthy and gives them the things that they need to do their jobs. So we need to make sure that we consider this. Again, this might be seen at the level of the PPE on the hierarchy, but it's something we want to make sure we do. And it's usually something that's very easy to do for employers to make sure that, like I said, workers are happy and healthy and that they have all the things that they need to do their jobs. And finally, wellness and MSI, they go hand in hand. It's something that we need to consider when we're talking about workplace injuries in general, but MSIs specifically. We need to make sure that we as workers, we make sure that we get enough exercise, we're eating right, we're maintaining those good postures, getting enough sleep, getting enough hydration, all those sorts of things to help reduce our own personal risks of MSIs, those personal risk factors that we bring to the job. So the less things that we bring into the job, the less things that we have to worry about when we're talking about MSI. Okay, so I do have a few slides here. I'm going to skip them for today because we're running out of time here. But basically, it was just an example of, there's a computer workstation here. So imagine you commute to your work 30 minutes in the morning. You sit at that desk all day long. You only get up from your desk for your lunch break or to go to the bathroom. Then you commute 30 minutes home. When you finally get home, you get your supper, and then you sit in front of the TV for the evening and you binge watch your favorite series. Think about all the time that day that you've spent sitting. Your muscles are continuously working to keep you in that posture. Do you feel stiff at the end of the day? Is your neck or back sore from trying to sit up straight and maintain good posture? So something like this is an example that we would give to employers or to workers to help them consider what are some things that I can do to control my risk of MSI. So things like making sure I have a proper workstation setup, taking on my breaks and taking some micro breaks, alternate tasks. So I go do my computer work for a while and then I go get some water and then I go do some photocopying and then I have to fix a photocopy machine because it's always broken. Then I got to go to the bathroom because I just drank a bunch of water. So again, these sort of things are things that we can do as workers and employers can help us do by ensuring that you have controls in the workplace. So there's one here for sustained postures, awkward postures, some things that we could do. If you're an auto body mechanic or a housekeeper and you're making beds, would be to use proper lifting techniques. Ensure that storing items that you need are at a regular level or a normal level, using any assistive devices, and making sure you're incorporating those micro breaks and breaks as well. Forceful exertion, again, same thing, using those assistive devices, using those proper body mechanics and safe lifting techniques, making sure you take your breaks, and making sure that you ask for help if you need it. And then finally for repetitive motion, so things again, like taking those micro breaks, they are very important. Not overreaching, facing the objects that you're working with, making sure that's approximately at elbow height, if you can get it at elbow height, whether it's on a assembly line or you're a cashier in a supermarket sort of thing. If possible, switch back and forth between sides. So you can use both sides of your body and make sure you have an anti-fatigue mat or something like that to help protect those joints on the bottom as well. So again, I just went through that really quickly because we ran out of time, but those are some things that you need to consider, some controls that you need to take into account when you're talking about these risk factors. So in summary, MSIs have a major impact on workplaces and can be debilitating for injured workers, and they also account for over 2/3 of all lost time claims in Newfoundland and Labrador workplaces in the past 5 years. There's several workplace and personal MSI risk factors, but they're most commonly caused by awkward postures, sustained postures, forceful exertion, and repetitive motion. Employers must have a process for risk factor identification, evaluation, and control. And incorporating those ergonomics principles of good design, fitting the task to the worker, incorporating those principles such as healthy postures, good body mechanics, safe lifting techniques are the things that we need to do. And incorporating them into the design and redesign of our workplaces and our jobs to be the most effective at reducing MSI risk. All right, we got our last poll here. So again, I know it's 3 o'clock, but if you could answer the poll for us, please. Tina's going to launch it there. So hopefully you learned something over the course of this webinar. So what is your knowledge now after completing the webinar? Again, very good, good, average, poor, or no knowledge. Again, the results won't be shared, so please make sure that you are honest with that. Tina's going to leave that open for a minute or so, and I'm going to keep going. So just so everyone knows, we also have a new health and safety podcast called The Signal. So it's available on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. And it's basically there's little snippets. They're usually 15 or 20 minute long of health and safety in the workplace, some things on MSI for this week. There's some things on serious injuries, on mental health. There's a whole variety of topics, so make sure you go and check it out. So upcoming webinars for the next couple of days. So tomorrow morning we have Is Pandemic Posture Affecting Your Health? Tomorrow afternoon, Move Well to Prevent MSIs. And on Friday morning, we have an overview of the MSI Prevention Certification Training Standard. Next week, we have Workplace Violence and Harassment Legislation overview, as well as strategies for success and early and safe return to work. So make sure if you're interested, you head to the CTR and you check those out. That brings us to the end of the presentations. If you have any questions, you feel free to type them in the chat box there, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Thanks.